Welcome to G Fun Facts Online, the show that peels back the layers of the world you thought you knew. Today, we're talking about something that affects every single one of us, from the moment we get our first paycheck to the day we retire: taxes. We all see that chunk of money disappear from our pay, but have you ever really stopped to wonder how that number is decided? Who builds this colossal, complicated structure called the Federal Tax Code? Today, we're going on an odyssey. We're pulling back the curtain on the journey of a federal tax bill, a labyrinthine path of political power, backroom deals, and a hidden world of dueling economic predictions. This is the story of the unseen architects who shape your taxes. Let's get into it. The United States Constitution is pretty clear on one thing. Article 1, Section 7 says, "All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives." That single sentence kicks off a legislative gauntlet that is both incredibly formal and intensely political. An idea for a tax change can come from anywhere: the president, a congressperson's campaign promise, or a think tank report. But to become real, it has to enter the arena. And its first stop is a place of immense power: the House Ways and Means Committee. Think of this committee as the first major boss battle for any tax bill. It's the oldest committee in Congress, and it holds the keys to the kingdom of taxation. This is where the bill gets its first real stress test. The committee holds public hearings, where economists, business leaders, and advocates all come to argue their case. After the hearings, the real legislative sausage-making begins in a process called the markup. This is where committee members debate every line, propose changes, and trade favors. And helping them through this is a crucial but often behind-the-scenes player: the Joint Committee on Taxation, or Junction. The Junction is a nonpartisan group of economists, lawyers, and accountants. They're like the neutral referees, drafting the official language and, most importantly, providing revenue estimates. They tell the politicians, "If you make this change, here's how much money we think it will bring in or cost the government." Once the Ways and Means Committee hammers out a version they can agree on, they vote. If it passes, it moves to the floor of the full House of Representatives for a vote. If it passes there, it's on to the next level, the Senate. The bill lands in the Senate's version of the Ways and Means, the powerful Senate Finance Committee. Here, the process repeats: more hearings, another markup. But the Senate plays by different rules. They have a famous or infamous tool called the filibuster. This allows a minority of senators to block a vote on a bill indefinitely, unless the other side can muster a supermajority of 60 votes. In today's divided political world, getting 60 votes for a major tax bill is almost impossible. But the majority party has a secret weapon, a procedural cheat code called reconciliation. If a bill is primarily about the budget, spending, revenue, or debt, it can be passed through reconciliation with just a simple majority of 51 votes. This is huge. It means the party in power doesn't need any votes from the opposition to pass a massive tax overhaul. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 passed through reconciliation. It completely changes the political game. Now let's say the Senate passes its own version of the bill, which is almost always different from the House version. What happens then? They have to form something called a conference committee. Key members from both the House and Senate committees get together in a room and hash out a single compromise bill. The Junction is there again, providing technical help and running the numbers on their compromises. Once they agree, that final bill goes back to both the House and the Senate for one last up or down vote. No more amendments, no more changes. If it passes both, it heads to the president's desk for the final step, to be signed into law, vetoed, or allowed to become law without a signature. It's an exhausting, high-stakes journey. But while all this political drama is playing out on C-SPAN, another, quieter battle is being waged. It's a battle of numbers, assumptions, and predictions, fought by the unseen architects of tax policy, the economic models. These complex computer models are the crystal balls that politicians use to justify their plans. The forecasts they produce, called scores, are constantly cited in the news and in congressional debates. The two official nonpartisan scorekeepers are the Junction, which we've mentioned, and the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO. They use a whole suite of sophisticated models to predict how a tax change will affect the country. They have models for individual taxes, corporate taxes, even estate and gift taxes. These models are incredibly detailed, using huge samples of anonymized tax returns to simulate the impact on different families. But the official scorekeepers aren't the only ones in the game. A number of influential think tanks have their own models and produce their own competing analyses. You might hear about the Tax Foundation, which is generally considered right-leaning, or the Tax Policy Center, which is seen as more center-left. Then there's the Penn-Wharton Budget Model and the American Enterprise Institute. These groups often come to very different conclusions than the official scorekeepers, and politicians will cherry-pick the analysis that best supports their argument. This all leads to perhaps the most heated, most political fight in the entire world of tax modeling, the debate over static versus dynamic scoring. Let me break it down. Conventional or static scoring is the traditional way of doing things. It basically assumes that a big tax change won't really affect the overall size of the economy. It predicts some small behavioral changes, like people shifting investments around, but it doesn't account for big-picture, macroeconomic feedback. Dynamic scoring tries to do just that. It attempts to predict how a tax change will affect the whole economy, things like GDP, investment, and jobs, and then includes the revenue from that economic change in the final price tag. For example, a dynamic score of a tax cut might say, "This cut will cost $1 trillion, but we predict it will boost GDP so much that the government will get $300 billion of that back in new tax revenue." You can see why this is so controversial. Supporters, often Republicans, say dynamic scoring is more realistic. It captures the pro-growth effects of tax cuts. Opponents, often Democrats, argue that it's just voodoo economics, based on uncertain assumptions that can be manipulated to make tax cuts look cheaper than they really are. This isn't just an academic debate. It has real-world consequences. Let's look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. The official Junction Dynamic Score predicted the law would boost the economy and that this growth would offset about a quarter of the bill's cost. But the Tax Foundation, using its own model, was way more optimistic, predicting a massive long-run boost to GDP and wages. Meanwhile, the Tax Policy Center's analysis was much more modest, projecting little to no effect in the long run and highlighting that the benefits would flow mostly to high-income households. Different models, different assumptions, vastly different results, all for the same law. Or take the recent debate over expanding the child tax credit. The JCT's analysis found that making the expansion permanent could actually have a small negative impact on GDP because they predicted the extra income would cause some parents to work fewer hours. But other groups, like the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, argued that these work disincentives are tiny and are far outweighed by the long-term benefits to children's health and education. Again, the models are at the center of the debate, trying to predict human behavior. So what's the takeaway here? For all their complexity, these economic models are not crystal balls. They are powerful and essential tools, but they are built on assumptions, and those assumptions can be flawed or influenced by political bias. The economy is an infinitely complex system, and predicting its future is a task that calls for a big dose of humility. The journey of a tax bill, from a glimmer in a politician's eye to the law of the land, is a fascinating mix of raw political power and an unseen battle of economic forecasts. It's a process designed to be deliberative, but one that is also shaped by partisan goals and competing visions for the future. By understanding this process, the legislative steps, the key committees, and especially the dueling economic models, we can all become more informed citizens. The next time you see a headline about a new tax proposal, you'll have a better understanding of the long road it has to travel, and you'll know to ask the right questions. Who is backing this? How are they trying to pass it? And most importantly, whose model, whose unseen architect, is shaping their version of the future? Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online. Well, see you next time.